Hello there, and thank you for tuning in to see what the world looks like through atheist eyes. I'm Frank Zindler, and I'm your host for this series of programs that I've prepared for American Atheists television. Today's program is titled Fun at the Bible's Expense. We'll be going back to the world we atheists lived in before the internet, when Dial-an-Atheist telephone recorded message lines were our only defense against the Christian news network Goliath. We'll relive some of the fun today. Come on and let's take a look at what I've got for you. Back in 1963, Madalyn Murray O'Hair had a lawsuit that went to the United States Supreme Court. It was a lawsuit to get forced prayer and Bible reading out of the public schools, and she won in the Supreme Court in 1963. After that, Life magazine called her the most hated woman in America. But she founded American Atheists, which is the sponsor of this and other programs. In about the year 1980, Madalyn decided that the Christian news network, Goliath, just had to be counteracted somehow. And so she got the idea of setting up telephone answering machine services with recorded messages, outgoing messages, not only advertising American Atheists, the organization, but also to be able to give messages and commentary on things of interest to atheists. In addition to that, her telephone line, which was called Dial-an-Atheist, it was a beacon of hope to atheists who were very isolated in those days. Every atheist thought he or she was the only one around. And so having something that you could look up in the telephone book and make contact with another atheist, this was quite a big deal. There was quite a blockade of information for atheists. We couldn't advertise in newspapers, we couldn't get people to print our books, and there was quite a difficult time. And so the Dial-an-Atheist service was very important outreach. Shortly thereafter, all of the regional chapters of American Atheists set up their own Dial-an-Atheist lines. And I had mine here in Columbus, Ohio. And at the height of my service, keep in mind there was no internet yet. At the height of my service, I had 3 answering machines running simultaneously 24 hours a day. People were calling from all over the world, including Australia. And in fact, we set up a satellite of the Ohio Dial-an-Atheist in Sydney, Australia. This went on for a number of years until finally the internet, of course, became very important and superseded the Dial-an-Atheist line. But many of the messages were of perennial significance, and so I published them originally in a book which was called Dial-an-Atheist Greatest Hits from Ohio. This book, unfortunately, now is out of print. I think about a year ago, I saw a copy of this for sale on eBay, and the starting price for bidding was about $600. Well, obviously that's not going to be anything that you can buy. And so just a few years ago, I published a set of 4 volumes of my collected short works called Through Atheist Eyes, Scenes from a World That Won't Reason. And in volume 4 of this book, I have reprinted some of the funnier Dial-an-Atheist messages from that collection, that earlier collection. So these books are available from American Atheists on our website, and of course they are available on Amazon. And you may have already noticed that the title of this book, Through Atheist Eyes, is pretty much the same thing as the title of this series of programs, Through Atheist Eyes with Frank Zindler. So many of the chapters in these volumes will be available if you get these books. The other thing I should mention about the Dial-an-Atheist sign, I composed a lot of silly songs. They were very satirical sorts of things. And among them was a rag called Rutabaga Baby. It was a satire of the right to single-celled lifer outfit and the anti-abortion groups. And so it had words, but the full score and the words for Rutabaga Baby are in volume 4 of my red books, as I call them, Through Atheist Eyes. Today, I'd like to share with you some of the Dial-an-Atheist messages that dealt with the Bible. I'd like to begin with a program that dealt with Noah's flood, as found in the 6th, 7th, and 8th chapters of the book of Genesis. That message was titled Noah's Plague Ship, and it dealt with a problem overlooked by the authors of Genesis, as well as the modern Bronze Age thinkers known as creation scientists. Since many diseases are themselves living things, Noah would have had to have preserved them in the ark also. Now, no longer is it a requirement that creationism be taught as science in the public schools of Ohio. This is as it should be, since creationism not only is religion instead of science, and it is demonstrably false as well. No matter how much the creationists may rattle on about thermodynamics and fossils and harmful mutations and monkeys jumping on typewriters and accidentally typing Hamlet, the Achilles heel of creationism has always been Noah's flood. Some will even try to deny that Noah's flood is part of scientific creationism. But they're lying through their teeth when they say this. Every last one of them believes the 2x2 baloney, and they expect to find a boat on the top of a mountain in Turkey. Today, I have a few puzzles for the diluvialists to figure out. The people who invented the flood myth didn't know that the earth was round, or I should say spherical. So they didn't realize the problems inherent in saying that so much water came down that it covered the highest mountain peaks on earth. Now, Mount Everest peak is about 5 miles above sea level. Where do you get enough water to flood the earth with a shell of water 5 miles thick? If all the moisture in the atmosphere condensed, it would only raise sea level a couple of inches. Melt all the ice caps in the glaciers, at most it would raise sea level several hundred feet. So there isn't enough water. But that's only part of the problem. Imagine that the earth is covered with a shell of water 5 miles deep. How did the water recede? Where would it go? It couldn't evaporate into space. It had to be magic, by golly. The myth writers didn't know that many diseases are caused by living microorganisms, but more of them in a later message. Since many diseases are living things, and since creationists say they can't evolve, it follows that all these diseases had to have been taken on Noah's Ark along with the critters. The 2 bunny rabbits had to be infested with every species of roundworm, tapeworm, and liver fluke known to be specific to rabbits. They had to have tularemia as well. The humans on the ark had to carry every disease known to be specific to humans. So we might ask, who in that saintly group had polio and who had smallpox? Who had typhoid and who had bubonic plague? Well, maybe just the rats had the plague. But among those saintly, holy persons on the boat, Noah and Mrs. Noah and his children, who had herpes? Who had AIDS? More important, who had syphilis? And who had gonorrhea? Answer that, ye true believers. That first message can be found in volume 4 of my book, Through Atheist Eyes, Scenes from a World That Won't Reason. My next message also can be found in that volume. It deals with a Bible passage dear to the Roman Catholic Church and everyone else opposing birth control. Although both Catholics and Protestants usually refer to the story as the story of Onan, I have always called it the story of Tamar and the three studs. I think you'll agree this is a much better title. Today, I want to share with you a story from the 38th chapter in Genesis. This is a story used by the Roman Catholic Church as grounds for opposing birth control, masturbation, who knows what else. My feeling is that it has nothing at all to do with birth control or masturbation. If it proves anything, it may be an argument for legalizing prostitution. The translation is my own. Its superiority to the King James Version will be obvious, I think. Once upon a time, there was a young woman named Tamar. Her husband, a man named did something naughty. Erred. And God zapped him dead before he had sired any children. So Judah, her father-in-law, told his other son, Onan, that would be, of course, Tamar's brother-in-law, Judah told Onan to sleep with her and produce offspring for his dead brother. Although most of the appropriate anatomy apparently became involved, Onan's heart, shall we say, wasn't in it. And he spilled his seed upon the ground, quote unquote, the Holy Bible. So God zapped him dead also. Time passed, and father-in-law Judah went home to Timnath to shear some sheep. Tamar, however, knowing his root and perceiving his true nature, got to the turnip patch before the big bad wolf did. Dressed like a prostitute, she waited for her father-in-law to come by. When Judah came by, he didn't realize it was his daughter-in-law, and he said to her, "Hey, baby, let's shear some sheep." Catch my drift? "How much will you pay?" she asked. "I'll send you a kid from my flock," Judah replied. "Will you give me a pledge until you send it?" Tamar bargained. "Okay," he said, and he gave her his seal and its cord and his walking staff. Judah did not spill his seed on the ground. He got her pregnant. 3 months passed, and Judah was told that his widowed daughter-in-law was expected. "She is, is she? Bring her out so she can be burned," he said. But when she was brought out, she said, "The father of my child, the father of my child, is a man to whom these things belong." And she exhibited Judah's seal, his cord, and his staff, the wooden one. Judah looked at the things and he said, "Oops." Actually, that's rendered as oopseth in the King James Version. And he promised not to have intercourse with her again. Tamar wasn't burned, and Judah wasn't blamed for having had intercourse with someone he thought was a prostitute. And they lived, all of them, happily ever after. Now, since no one punished Judah for sleeping with a prostitute, or Tamar for being one, we have to conclude that prostitution isn't really against the teachings of the Bible. Another Dial-an-Atheist program that you can find in Volume 4 of my book, Through Atheist Eyes, is an amusing one dealing with a story about the capture of the Ark of the Covenant, a story found in 1 Samuel chapter 4. Sometimes I've called this program Adventures of a God in a Box, but it's better known now as Dem Golden Hemorrhoids. I've finally gotten back to work on my new, improved translation of the Bible. Today I want to read to you my version of the story in 1 Samuel chapter 4 and so forth, about the capture of the Ark of the Covenant. Once upon a time, in the days when the Israelites were still in the business of killing off all the neighboring peoples of Palestine, they got into a fight with the Philistines, and they got stumped pretty bad, losing 4,000 men. What went wrong? They asked each other. Usually, Jehovah had helped them kill Gentiles with great efficiency. But now the tables appeared to have been turned. Let's go fetch the Ark of the Covenant, they said, the box in which Jehovah is kept between two cherubim. With Jehovah in his box here beside us, we can't lose. And it came to pass, they went to Shiloh and got their God in the box, along with the God's two bodyguards, Hophni and Phinehas, the sons of Eli, the judge of all Israel. They should have been suspicious of a God who had to have bodyguards. But alas, they all went back to play the Phillies. They lost 30,000 men. Worse yet, the Phillies hardballed Hophni and Phinehas right on their soft spots, captured the God in the box, and took it home with them, thinking it might be a good place to keep their dirty socks. One of the Israelites fled the battle and ran to tell Eli that the God in the box hadn't worked at all. Maybe Eli had forgotten to supply the batteries for the thing? Now, Eli was 98 years old. He was blind and sitting on a chair beside the town gate. When the soldier told him that his two sons were dead and that the God in the box had been stolen, Eli fell over backward off his chair and broke his neck and died. Now, Eli, you see, was very fat, and he couldn't stand on his head very long without developing structural defects. Eli had been judge over Israel for 40 years. Now, this is fortunate, because if he had ruled for 39 or 41 years, he probably wouldn't have gotten into the Bible at all. It's always 40 this and 40 that. Few other numbers ever get into the good book. But the story gets worse. Eli's daughter-in-law, the widow now of Phinehas, heard what had happened. Being far along in her pregnancy, she collapsed and gave birth to a son. As she lay unconscious, dying, the woman attending her consoled her. "Don't worry, honey, it's all right. The baby's a boy." Unimpressed, the unconscious woman died and named her son Ichabod. Now, the sequence of events is exactly as recorded in Holy Writ. You can check it out. Ichabod means gone is the glory. Meanwhile, back in the Phillies' home stadium, things were in turmoil too. The Philistines had taken the God in the box to their temple of Dagon. That night, when all the priests of Dagon were sleeping, Jehovah opened the lid of his box, crawled out, and went over to Dagon and kicked him in the behind, making him fall on his face on the floor. Jehovah went back into his box. And the next morning, the priests discovered Dagon on the floor. They put him back up where he belonged. And the next night, Jehovah got out of his box again. This time, not only did he push Dagon over onto the floor, he cut off all the parts of Dagon that stuck out from his body. Now this really rattled the priests the next morning when they found the pieces strewn about. Although Jehovah later on would kill Uzzah dead on the spot for daring to touch God's own box when it was about to fall off an ox, the Phillies who had made off with the box didn't get so much as a reprimand from the umpire. But they did get their comeuppance, literally. Jehovah smote them all with hemorrhoids, so that hardly a man in the whole country could sit down. As I said, this was a comeuppance. What to do? The Philistines decided to send Jehovah, still in his packing crate, back to the Israelites. But they decided to send also an offering along with it. So they made 5 golden hemorrhoids. I'm not making this up. And they made 5 golden mice and put them in a treasure chest. Then, since they couldn't find any FedEx envelopes big enough, they loaded the God in the box and the hemorrhoid holder onto a wagon drawn by 2 cows, and they aimed the whole contraption in the direction of Israel and said, "Don't call us, we'll call you." When the Israelites saw the returning God in the box, they rejoiced. Straight away they chopped up the wagon for kindling, and they burned up the 2 cows for a sacrifice. Jehovah inhaled all the vaporized cow tissue and blessed the Israelites. All except for the 70 that he killed, because a couple of them had snuck a peek inside his box. And the Israelites lived happily ever after, and the Philistines went extinct. Our next program deals with a Bible verse they never taught you in Sunday school. It's in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 19, verse 12. Keep those numbers in mind. Chapter 19, 12. It deals with the subject of eunuchs. After I tell you this story, I'll have another funny story to tell you about a television debate in which I found good use for this verse. A Bible passage you will never hear as a subject of a sermon in church is Matthew 19:12. Jesus is speaking after telling his disciples that divorce is not permissible to men except if their wives are fornicators, without saying under what circumstances, if any, a woman would be allowed to divorce her husband. Anyway, JC is quoted as saying, "For there are some eunuchs which were so born from their mother's womb. And there are some eunuchs who were made eunuchs of men. And there were eunuchs which have made themselves eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven's sake. Let him who is able to receive it, let him receive it." Now, in the early church, this verse was the justification for many men emasculating themselves when in a fit of religious ecstasy and anesthesia. Up until the time of Mozart, the popes used the passage to justify castration of choir boys, so the papal choir could have adult soprano voices, women being too depraved a species to be allowed to sing before the throne of Peter. Alas, Pope John Paul II, or John Paul II, seems to have forgotten this passage during his trip to Canada, when he even went so far as to say that birth control by the rhythm method may be immoral at times if it prevents people from having, quote, the morally correct number of children. He forgot that eunuchs don't have children at all, nor do popes, for that matter. At least they're not supposed to. What we atheists need to do is start challenging Christian leaders such as Jerry Falwell, Oral Roberts, Pat Robertson, and others to demonstrate their faith and Christian commitment. In the phraseology of Matthew 19:12, are they able to receive it? Are they able to receive it without Novocaine? We really ought to try to make this verse more popular among Christian leaders today. They've gotten altogether too liberal and too far away from the teachings of Jesus. If Jesus thought being a eunuch was an honorable occupation, who are these modern highfalutin Christians to disagree? While I'm at it, I need to shame Christian leaders into demonstrating their faith in faith, as it is described in Mark 16, verses 17 and 18. And these signs shall follow them that believe. They shall take up serpents, and if they drink any deadly thing, it shall not hurt them. Perhaps the World Council of Churches could reconvene in Jonestown, Guyana, and demonstrate its faith with the leftover Kool-Aid. If you think all this is shocking, there's something even more shocking. These passages come from a book which even nominally sane people commonly referred to as the good book. I never had the jolly good fun of debating Jerry Falwell, the founder of the so-called moral majority. But I did have a hoot of a time debating on Indianapolis television the national secretary of moral majority, the Reverend Dr. Did I get 5 doctors? Reverend Greg J. Dixon, the pastor at that time of the Indianapolis Baptist Temple. It was a megachurch with around 8,000 members at that time. The debate was on the Dick Wolfsey show. Wolfsey had told me that the guy was a real nut who was claiming churches shouldn't pay taxes of any kind, including withholding and FICA, and that Dixon was wielding a great deal of power in ultra-right-wing political circles. So, I don't remember exactly what the topic of debate was supposed to be, but we quickly got to the supposed infallibility of the Bible. Surely you don't believe that everything in the Bible is true, I provoked him. Absolutely, he retorted. Even the forged last 12 verses of the Gospel of Mark, I teased. They weren't forged. They're all inspired, he shouted. Even verses 17 and 18, where it says true believers can take up serpents and drink poison and not be harmed? Of course. Well, this is great. We can see if the Bible is infallible or not, right now in this studio, on this show. I reached into my suit pocket and pulled out a small box of strychnine-poisoned peanuts. I just happened to bring a box of some poisoned peanuts. They're intended for rodent control, but I think they probably would work on believers in biblical inerrancy as well. Would you mind eating these peanuts to prove your faith in faith? Furiously he shouted, "Thou shalt not tempt the Lord thy God." Oh my goodness, how did I make such a mistake? I thought I was tempting you. I didn't know you were God. I don't remember what he said next, but within a minute or so, I delivered the knockout. I quoted from memory the entirety of the passage in Matthew 19:12, ending with, "And there are those who have made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. He that can receive it, let him receive it." At that moment, I pulled out of my pocket an old Boy Scout knife and offered it to Dixon. "Are you able to receive it?" I challenged him. "Or is your faith too weak?" Immediately, we cut for a commercial. There was a round coffee table between Dixon and me, and it had a picture of ice water and some small plastic glasses on it. Shaking like he had palsy, the secretary of the moral majority picked up his glass of water to take a drink. His hand was shaking so badly, however, that the water sloshed out of the glass before he could get it to his mouth. What a hoot. Years after the debate, the feds laid siege to the Baptist Temple for 93 days. Nixon and his son, who was then the pastor, were holed up in there with some people from the congregation trying to hold off the feds, but finally the feds took it over. And then they confiscated it for violation of tax laws. For some reason or other, they then bulldozed the whole temple complex. I never quite understood that. But Dixon is still going strong, as far as I know. He, as far as I know, is still the CEO of the Biblical Law Center in Indianapolis. Now, anyway, you might try to make use of these two Bible passages yourself the next time you are assaulted by a member of the clergy. We'll have more Dial-an-Atheist fun for you in some later programs. Until next time, I'm Frank Zindler.